When a certain demographic can't understand something, the conclusions they reach are off the chart. Welcome to World of Batshit. The Moon. Once revered as a deity, much is now known about the Moon, its origins and its motions. There are, however, people in the modern world who think the Moon is a hologram. Naturally, we'll be needing proof of this claim, so here's just one proponent of this idea who is telling you that the Moon is a hologram at 55,000 feet, and he simply doesn't care about your opinions or what facts you and your fancy post-elementary level education can offer. Confident indeed. So we must surely have some compelling evidence lined up for us.
I'm going to pull it in just a bit. You're going to see that you can see the entire ring of the projection of the so-called moon, and you can already see the pink purpling. We'll get a little bit closer and you'll see the green come in, and then a purpling around the outside of the projection.
He doesn't explain why a purple fringe can only be caused by a projection, however it doesn't matter. This one comes straight from the use of consumer-grade optics and a basic inability to understand their effects. Different colours of light refract by different amounts when passing through a lens. It's the same reason a prism splits light into its component colours. The intention of lenses, of course, is to bring light to a desired focal plane, but since different wavelengths of light are refracted by different amounts, they are focused to different points. The effect, chromatic aberration, is most visible around high contrast edges, and it has to be designed out, since it is impossible for any single lens to bring all colours to the same focus. The higher the quality of the lenses, the less chromatic aberration you'll see. Unsurprisingly, high-quality lenses are expensive, and so this effect tends to be quite marked in mainstream consumer goods, where the incentive to perfect the optical design isn't the highest. You don't need to take shaky images of the Moon to see chromatic aberration. Here's a shot of a horse. We can tell from the purple around the mane that this is a holographic horse projected into the field by unnamed operatives to promote a satanic conspiracy and hide the fact that the real horse has been spirited away for rectal probing and use in burgers and glue. Even broadcast quality cameras can suffer from the effect. Here's a still from the BBC's Wonders of the Universe programme, which we saw in World of Batshit 1. The same purple fringing is evident around the trees. Clearly then these are holographic trees projected into the scene by unnamed operatives to promote a satanic conspiracy. But wait, the moon loons have more so-called evidence.
And anyways, just so you see what it should look like, that should be what it should be looking like right now. The second picture from the left. That's what it should be looking like right now. No matter what these idiots tell you, it's not supposed to be laying on its side like that.
For some reason, these people think that the moon should always appear upright in the sky. Of course, with a cursory understanding of the sky, it's easy to see that what we observe is entirely expected, and that reality is under no obligation to orient itself to a picture you hold in your hand. If you watch the moon traverse the sky from horizon to horizon, you'll see that it appears to rotate as it does so. Watch it night after night, and you'll see that it does this every single time. There's nothing odd about it. The amount of apparent rotation depends on your latitude. If you live near the equator, you could watch the moon rotate through pretty much 180 degrees from horizon to horizon. Watch from a pole, and it won't appear to rotate at all. Of course, if these conspiratards were actually prepared to watch the sky for more than the few minutes it takes to point a camera at the moon, they would have noticed that it's not just the moon that does this, but the entire bloody sky and every celestial object in it, depending on its position in the sky. This must be clear proof that the entire sky is a hologram. No. And naturally, since these phenomena happen every day of every month of every year, and have done since Earth formed, none of this is a sign of anything other than the universe going about its physics-compliant business as usual. Presumably it would blow their minds if they ever went to the southern hemisphere and found that the moon appears to be upside down just by virtue of a change of the observer's location. Cletus's reasoning doesn't get any more sophisticated than, "Moon don't look like my picture, so it's fake." The illuminated portion of the moon always faces the sun, so of course when the sun is below the horizon, the moon's illumination in the first quarter faces the horizon. For the moon to be illuminated from the right, like his picture, the sun would have to be over to the right, and would therefore be above the horizon. So Cletus would be taking his footage in broad daylight, and the sun would be inexplicably in the north of the sky. Why is it even necessary to explain this to someone who has made it to biological adulthood? The irony of Cletus' arguments from ignorance is that if the moon were oriented and illuminated as per his expectations, then that would indeed be highly unusual. It's worth noting too that he doesn't use his strip of lunar images to prove that all letter B's are fake, because they're not written on their side, like this one. Let's see what else is offered as evidence that the moon is fake.
Looking at this egg in the sky, you can see that it's too bright, much too bright. You can see that.
Do they have some measurements to substantiate this ridiculous claim? No, of course not. It's just another half-assed opinion. As if the world's least educated people are arbiters of how bright the moon should be. Reality should conform to their expectations, otherwise there's a conspiracy against them. The moon's apparent brightness and size do vary because its orbit isn't quite circular, and so its distance from Earth varies. Measure the apparent size and brightness of the moon, and it changes in entirely predictable cycles. Of course, it's much easier to just point a camera at the sky and claim there's something wrong with the image. However, there isn't. There are normal optical effects like chromatic aberration, which we've looked at, but some fake moon nuts claim that their camera's inability to focus is also proof that the moon isn't real.
It won't even focus. There's nothing there to focus on.
As if autofocus is some kind of reality detector. Had they bothered to read their camera's manual, they would have found typical warnings about the limitations of autofocus. It can be difficult when the subject is fast moving, or if the camera is subject to excess jitter. Autofocus needs some degree of stability to work, so if you're waving your camera around like a lunatic, then it's just not going to work. Extremely bright objects, or objects with insufficient colour contrast, are also a problem. Something bright, like, say, the moon, can become difficult to focus on if the camera is also determining exposure across the entire image and achieving a balance. Cameras aren't telepathic. Bearing this in mind, I pointed my travel camera at the moon and snapped this shot using a tripod and delayed shutter release. Now of course it's not going to win any astrophotography prizes, and we can see that the sensor is a little bit noisy in places. What is conspicuous by its absence though is any chromatic aberration. But even if that were there, as we've seen, it would be perfectly normal, just not very aesthetically pleasing as a photo. If the moon really were a projection, what is it projected onto, and how?
That's about 55,000 feet or so. That's those little tiny orbs you see that look small from Earth, but they have these really big, long chemtrail type clouds. Those are the ones that lay out that really high level screen, and that falls down in the mountains.
So let's get this straight. Somewhere, unnamed pilots are employed by an unnamed organisation to fly day after day, spraying perfectly uniform clouds at 55,000 feet, onto which a fake moon is projected to hide the supposed absence of the real moon. One problem with this idea, aside from the fact that it's complete horseshit that hasn't been thought through in any way, shape or form, is that if the moon really were an image projected onto invisible clouds at 55,000 feet, you wouldn't have to travel very far before the moon would disappear over your horizon. Unfortunately, take any long-distance flight on a moonlit night, and you'll notice that the moon doesn't do this. In Supplement 1 of Testing Geocentrism, we saw the simple principle that an object's apparent size depends on its distance from the observer. An object twice as far away appears half the size. Simple. This also means that when you're on your long-distance flight at, say, 37,000 feet, the moon is going to appear 3 times the size, because rather than being 55,000 feet away from the cloud screen, you're now only 18,000 feet away. But what of those on the ground? Well, they don't have to move far to see differences either. Cletus observes the moon directly overhead, so it's 16.764 kilometers away from him. We'll call this distance r. How far away does Brandine have to be for the holographic moon to be twice as far away? Simple Pythagoras theorem tells us that she has to be root 3r away from Cletus, which means that while she's at work at the topless dancing bar 29 kilometers away, the moon would appear only half the size. The alert among you will have noticed that I haven't factored in the curvature of the Earth. You can see though that over significantly larger distances it's going to make the problem much worse. Another rather obvious problem is that if the real moon isn't there anymore, what causes eclipses? And the tides.
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can explain why the tide goes in.
Tide goes in, tide goes out.
See, the water, the tide comes in and it goes out, Mr. Silverman.
Maybe
it always comes in
on top of Mount Olympus who's making the tides go in and out.
No, but you can't explain
a scam
that.
And a myth of the same. The
you can't
myth
explain
and religion are the same thing. It doesn't matter if I can explain it.
It doesn't?
That doesn't mean that an invisible magic man in the sky is doing it.
And you're free to believe that.
We know the tides are a complete mystery to Bill O'Reilly, so perhaps it's no surprise that others also have no idea what causes them. Here are a few pointers. Number 1, the moon. Number 2, the sun. And number 3,
gravity, you f***ing retard!
Yet another problem with the idea that the moon is projected onto clouds is that clouds are diffuse and scatter light, and anyone with a powerful binoculars or telescope can see crisp images of the moon, which clearly aren't the result of a projection onto something diffuse. No matter what magnification you have available to you, the moon is always revealed for what it is, a ball of rock orbiting Earth. A few other problems with the idea that the moon has been replaced with a hologram are the rather obvious questions. Who stole the moon? When? Where are they hiding it? How do you move something with a mass of 7.3477 times 10 to the 22 kilograms? And how do you do this without anyone noticing? These are just some of the problems with arguments from ignorance and claims pulled out of one's backside. The original claim comes with a burden of proof that cannot be met, and each additional conspiratorial embellishment that supposedly explains things actually explains nothing and only enlarges the burden of proof further. Where is the alleged holographic moon projected from?
Let me use this joint as a pointer. This moon is a projection called Project Bluebeam. The satellite that is currently servicing my neck of the woods is called GEOS 20 is the satellite. 20, it's a geosynchronous satellite.
This brings an immediate conflict with another group of conspiracy nuts who claim that there are no satellites and that we've never been into space. As you've come to expect, that's not the only issue. A typical angular diameter for the moon is 32 arc minutes, or 0.53 degrees. With some basic trigonometry we can calculate the diameter of the conspiratard holographic moon. If it's 16.764 kilometers above Cletus, and with an angular diameter of 0.53 degrees, we find that the radius of the projected moon is just 77.5 meters. Its diameter then is 155 meters. Now let's consider Brandine in the town 29 kilometers away. When she leaves the topless dancing bar, the moon is twice as far away, as we found before, and appears half the size. However, she's also looking at the chemtrail cloud screen from an angle. Do the calculations and we find that the moon appears half the height again, which means that for Brandine the moon will be twice as wide as it is tall and looks something like this. Oops. Let's say that Brandine's workplace is to the east of Cletus. We've established that for her the moon obviously won't appear overhead as it does for him. Shadows cast by the moon then will point east. But if Brandine hooks up with Beau and drives past Cletus's town and on to the west where Beau lives, she'll find her moonlight shadow now cast to the west. This of course doesn't happen. Shadows cast by the moon are always consistent with it being over 360,000 kilometers away, rather than just under 17. People who think shadows are part of the satanic conspiracy will be delighted to know that Dave, has more evidence that the real moon has been kidnapped and replaced with a projection. They're using a website called Photoforensics to compare images, with predictably hilarious results. He compares this image, which was taken with NASA's Galileo spacecraft on the 7th of December 1992, with this one, which he took himself. Unsurprisingly, the analysis results of the two completely different source images are completely different. Nice work, Dave, nice work. Here are some factors Dave hasn't considered. One image is high quality, taken using decent optics. It's in focus, it's correctly exposed, and shows no chromatic aberration. The other is a low quality image taken with a camcorder. It's poorly focused, overexposed, and shows chromatic aberration. The high quality image has no apparent compression artifacts. Dave's, on the other hand, is so bad it appears to be almost entirely comprised of compression artifacts, which are consequences of using a camcorder which has to compress and save 25 or 30 or 50 or 60 such images each second within the bandwidth available to it. Dave also uses the analysis on this image.
This next picture is a photo of a star. You can see right there, and it's right through what's supposed to be the moon. In photo forensics, you can see, in fact, it's nothing. There's nothing there, it's just light.
If there was nothing there, you wouldn't have a photo of it. The reason why Cletus doesn't understand the output of ELA is because he didn't bother to read this handy tutorial on the site. He already assumes he knows what the output means, and of course what it means is that pictures he's decided up front are real, and pictures he's decided aren't. The ELA algorithm detects differences in the compression levels within the image. An image that has been saved a number of times will tend to give a darker ELA output, as will low contrast images. It can be used then to identify areas of an image which stand out, perhaps because they have been subject to digital alteration, but this says nothing about the original subject matter of the image. The reason Cletus gets nothing in his result for his blue picture is because there are no high contrast edges in the image, and compression levels are virtually the same all over. The tutorial even explains why regions with uniform colouring will give a dark result. Dave, however, thinks that photo forensics is some kind of reality detector. Supply it with a photo and it pops out a result, real or fake. Here's a photo of a hologram of a mouse. According to Cletus, ELA should prove that this mouse is a hologram by producing a black result. So here goes. Oops. It seems then that ELA can't be used to tell whether the mouse is real or not. Princess Leia hologram added in post-production. Definitely not real. ELA says real. Oh. What about the moon then? I took my original photo of the moon and then made it look like something Dave would have taken, by giving it some chromatic aberration and compression artifacts. I then subjected both of these images to ELA. Unsurprisingly, the results are very different. As expected, this tells us nothing about the moon. It does, however, tell us that Cletus isn't the sharpest pencil in the box. What other evidence of the moon's holographic credentials are on offer? The audio here is very quiet, so I'll sum up. He claims that this image is important because the lens flares are reflections of the actual satellite projection. Wrong again. They are lens flares which you could create with any bright light source. That's just how lenses work.
So the Bible says that the moon shall shine like the sun, and the sun shall shine 7 times. Try to say that a few times.
It's night time. Compare and contrast.
One of my jobs was to measure the temple, which is creation. And I've done that through my measurements over the last 7 months, I guess.
Unfortunately, although Dave claims to have been taking measurements, he hasn't thought to actually present any. Perhaps he just doesn't know what measuring things actually entails. We can be sure, however, that it doesn't involve pointing a camera at things and making assertions based on no measurements whatsoever.
You just need to look up because there's a Leo star up there. There's a Leo. Leo the lion, straight up. That means that God's coming back. And this time he means business.
High in the sky, you say? Well, I'm betting that's normal for Dave's latitude at the time of night and time of year when this video was made. Come back in a year's time at the same time of day, and Leo will be in the same position in the sky, and so will all the other stars barring supernovae. Since God didn't come back last year when Leo was high in the sky, or the year before, or any of the previous 4.6 billion years, I think a firm pattern of not coming back has been established. Dave's failure to notice this might seem odd for a man who advocates that you should get out there and look at the sky. It's almost as if the secret to reaching conclusions about the sky isn't to just walk outside, smoke a joint, and make shit up because you don't understand what's going on. Like Monroe, who we saw in part 1, Dave is an end times fraud. He thinks pretty much everything is a hoax, from shootings to plane crashes to World War I and World War II. And what's left is a sign that his magic sky daddy is coming back. Since he doesn't care one jot for your opinions, you are a goat who can only become as enlightened as Dave by being so off your face on drugs that you think we have the rocketry available to kidnap an entire moon without anybody noticing it receding into the distance.
This is real time. I'm not making this up. This is what they have. This is what, I guess, what do you say when it's like you run it through the computer? This would be a model of what they're expecting the first wave to look like in their triangular craft.
While Dave is playing asteroids and claiming that the ominous they will be using this model with triangular craft as the first wave of whatever the fuck it is he's talking about, the world's goats have noticed that his shitty camcorder is busy doing what it does best, failing to focus, adding compression artifacts, and applying copious chromatic aberration to everything it records. Dave's television, it seems, and probably the rest of his lounge, must be a hologram too. The idea that the moon is a hologram is simply an argument from ignorance. Ignorance of the basic motions of the cosmos, coupled with a remarkable ability to jump to ridiculous conclusions without having thought things through, or even bothering to find out how your camera actually works. If you've been wondering how deluded people can get, type moon hologram into the search box and check out the loons who think the moon is a hologram. It's a world of batshit.
All you little he and she goats. Looks like your little pins where you'll be shuffled off into are nice and ready. Look at that fake moon projection before it's too late. Alright? And by the blood of Christ you will be saved by his grace. Of the moon, of the sun, and of the stars. All of those signs that we were told to look for.